This is the face of a man erased by war. It's a stark, haunting photograph of a soldier whose features have been almost completely obliterated. Online, he's been given a name: Lieutenant Mustafa Ipar, an Ottoman officer said to have been horrifically wounded at the Battle of Gallipoli. The story goes that shrapnel tore away his identity, leaving a void where his face once was. It's a legendary tale of suffering and survival, one that promises a journey into the darkest horrors of World War I and the miraculous birth of a new kind of medicine. But what if the story isn't that simple? When you look for official records, you find a ghost. The name, the rank, even the specific history, it all seems to dissolve under scrutiny. The soldier's actual identity, nationality, and where he was wounded are all uncertain. What's left is the chilling photograph and a story that has taken on a life of its own. This isn't just the story of one man, it's the story of the tens of thousands he represents. This is the unbelievable true story of the girl cassée, the broken faces, and how the quest to rebuild them gave birth to modern plastic surgery from the crucible of war. The legend of the man called Mustafa Ipar begins in the trenches of World War I, a conflict defined by sheer, unimaginable slaughter. Campaigns like Gallipoli in 1915, where Allied forces stormed the beaches hoping to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, quickly bogged down into the war's grim signature: trench warfare. But this wasn't just on the beaches of Turkey. All along the Western Front, millions of soldiers hunkered down in elaborate networks of ditches, and trench warfare had a fatal flaw. It protected the body, but left the head exposed. Peeking over the parapet for even a split second was a life-or-death gamble. The primary killer and the architect of these devastating injuries was artillery. Shells packed with shrapnel would explode overhead, raining down a storm of jagged metal fragments that tore through flesh and bone with sickening ease. A single shell could wipe out a dozen men. Those who survived were often left with injuries of a severity never seen before. The human face, a delicate architecture of bone, muscle, and nerve, simply stood no chance. It's in a hellscape like this that the man in the photograph suffered his cataclysmic wound. One moment, a soldier. The next, a casualty of a new and terrible kind. For those who survived a facial wound, the immediate aftermath was a waking nightmare. In the chaos of the battlefield, it's believed that stretcher bearers, overwhelmed and conditioned by past wars, where such an injury was a certain death sentence, would sometimes pass them by, leaving conscious men for dead. For the lucky few who were evacuated, a different kind of horror began. They became the girls cassées, a French expression meaning the broken faces. In France alone, an estimated 15,000 soldiers were classified this way. These were men who had lost their jaws, their noses, their eyes, their cheeks. They were often unable to eat, drink, or speak. Many could only take nourishment through a straw. The very things that made them human, the ability to smile, to frown, to communicate, were stolen. Their reflection was considered so horrifying that mirrors were often removed from the wards where they were treated. Society, unprepared for this new category of wounded, often recoiled. There's a persistent, though likely apocryphal story about special benches, painted blue, being set aside in some British parks, a supposed warning for the public to avert their eyes. While the story may not be true, it speaks to a deeper truth. These men, who had sacrificed so much, were now treated as outcasts. Their injuries weren't always seen as heroic wounds, like an amputation, but as something monstrous and shameful. They had survived the war, but now faced a profound crisis of identity. When you lose your face, do you lose yourself? The medical establishment was completely unprepared for the scale and severity of these injuries. But out of this crisis, pioneers emerged. On opposite sides of the war, two visionary surgeons were about to change the world. In Britain, there was Harold Gillies, a brilliant ear, nose, and throat surgeon from New Zealand. Stationed in France, he was appalled by the crude attempts to simply stitch up these catastrophic wounds. He knew something more had to be done. He lobbied the army relentlessly, and in 1917 was given his own specialist hospital in Sidcup, England, dedicated entirely to facial reconstruction. Meanwhile, in Germany, Dr. Jacques Joseph, an orthopedic surgeon by training, was already a known pioneer in rhinoplasty. Before the war, he'd been looked down on for performing surgeries to correct appearances, like pinning back a boy's ears, which was seen as frivolous vanity. But Joseph argued passionately that this wasn't about vanity. It was about easing the psychological suffering caused by disfigurement. When the war broke out, his radical ideas suddenly became desperately necessary, and he was appointed to lead a facial surgery unit in Berlin. The online legend claims the man known as Mustafa Ipar was sent to Dr. Joseph's clinic for surgery. While we have no record to prove that specific link, it was to men like Joseph and Gillies that thousands of broken faces turned as their last hope. These surgeons weren't just mending wounds, they were attempting to restore identities. The challenge was immense. Simply grafting a piece of skin over a wound was doomed to fail. Without a blood supply, the tissue would die, and in a world before antibiotics, infection was a constant, lethal threat. The breakthrough came from Harold Gillies, who developed and popularized a revolutionary technique called the tube pedicle. The concept was both simple and ingenious. Instead of cutting a skin graft completely free, Gillies would raise a flap of skin from a healthy part of the body, like the chest or forehead, but leave one end attached to its original blood supply. He'd then stitch the long flap into a tube. This protected it from infection and kept the tissue alive. This tube of living flesh then began a slow, agonizing journey across the body in a process nicknamed waltzing. A surgeon would detach one end of the tube and reattach it closer to the face. After a few weeks, once a new blood supply was established, they'd detach the other end and move it again. Step by painful step, over months or even years, this living pipeline of skin would be walked up to the face, where it could be opened up and used to reconstruct a nose, a lip, or a cheek. It was an ordeal. Patients endured dozens of operations, often over several years. They lay in hospital beds for what felt like an eternity, their bodies contorted by these strange fleshly tubes. The process was excruciating, with constant risks of failure and infection. But for the first time, surgeons could bring healthy, robust tissue with its own blood supply to the face, allowing for true reconstruction. They used cartilage from ribs to build new noses and bone from the hip to sculpt new jawlines. It was a fusion of medicine and artistry, an act of creation in the face of total destruction. The results weren't perfect. No surgery could ever fully restore what was lost. But what Gillies, Joseph, and their colleagues achieved was nothing short of miraculous. They gave men back the ability to eat a meal, to breathe through their nose, to speak to their loved ones. They gave them a face they could show to the world. While many veterans with disfigurements did face social isolation, research reveals a more nuanced picture. A surprising number of these men went on to lead full and happy lives. They married, had children, found work, and were loved and respected in their communities. Their resilience and the acceptance they found from their families was as crucial as any surgical procedure. They learned to live with their scars, finding a way to reconcile their altered appearance with their enduring identity. The photo that is often labeled as Mustafa Ipar remains a powerful and haunting symbol. We may never know the true name of the soldier in the picture, or the exact details of his journey, but he is not a ghost. He is the face of the tens of thousands of men who suffered facial trauma during World War I. He represents the unprecedented horror of industrial warfare and the suffering it inflicted. But he also represents something more. His story, and the stories of the thousands of men like him, forced medicine to make an incredible leap forward. The techniques developed out of necessity in the surgical tents and hospitals of World War I by pioneers like Gillies and Joseph formed a major part of the foundations of modern plastic and reconstructive surgery. Every skin graft, every complex reconstruction performed today owes a debt to the suffering of these men and the ingenuity of the surgeons who refused to look away. The history of medicine is filled with incredible stories of crisis and innovation. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. And let us know in the comments what other forgotten corners of medical history you'd like to see us explore next. The story of the man called Mustafa Ipar is a reminder that behind every historical statistic lies a human being. The First World War left around 10 million soldiers dead and nearly 20 million wounded. But in the midst of that devastation, it also sparked a revolution in healing. It proved that even when faced with the most horrific destruction imaginable, the human drive to restore, to rebuild, and to reclaim one's identity can lead to the most extraordinary creations. It's a legacy written on the very faces of those who survived.